Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Backlog Bunker. This week, I played a few more things that I had originally planned on, but that's for a couple of reasons. Because, firstly, since I took last week off, I've just had more time to play more things, and also because since I was off last week, it's because I was home, and when I was home, I didn't have my PC, and so the only options I had to play on things were on my Steam Deck, on which I wasn't up to Yakuza 6 yet because I hadn't finished watching the Yakuza 5 cutscenes, and I brought my 3DS with me so I could play Fire Emblem Awakening, because, I just felt like playing it. And it was originally supposed to not last that long, it was just something to play while I was at home for Thanksgiving, and then I ended up playing way more of it, and planning out way more of it, and now I'm up to the point where I am now, where I'm gonna beat the game again. It's as simple as that. And like most things, upon revisiting it, I've come to new realizations, which is something that I didn't think would ever happen for me playing Fire Emblem Awakening, because this is my fourth playthrough at this point, and my fourth full playthrough. I've started playthroughs and just not finished them before, but I've played the game a lot. I think it's like it's in the top 5 of the games I have the most hours on, between like Fantasy Life or Animal Crossing. It's up to like 250 at this point, is the point I'm trying to get at. And one of the first things that I noticed was in terms of the support charts. Because, like I said, I planned out my entire playthrough because I want to see new S supports, so I just planned out what characters I'm going to pair with before I even start the game, and I did that for my last playthrough too. And this time when I was going through them, I noticed that Chrom and Sumia have the fewest romance options in the whole game, aside from like the characters that can only date Robin or whatever, but Chrom and Sumia have like maybe 2 or 3 romance options that aren't each other, and I suspect that this is some sort of trick from the game to get players to put Chrom and Sumia together, since they're, for the most part, the intended pairing in terms of how the story's supposed to go. From a game design standpoint, I appreciate this and think this is like pretty good design, because it's going to ease players into how the romance mechanics work and pairing up and all that fun stuff. But from a shipping perspective, I absolutely hate it, because obviously I put Chrom and Sumia together in my first playthrough, but I'm on my 4th now, and I want Chrom to date other people, and in a non-female Robin game, that just limits his romance options even further. So it makes things hard, especially when you start going down the list and you realize there are romance options that Chrom doesn't have that he really should. Like Chrom and Pan, why is that not a romance option? Because, and this isn't just me being biased, I love Pan, it's mostly because like the whole thing with Pan and most of her S supports are that it becomes a conversation about like human and tactile relationships, and it's really just relations on the whole for like the entire species. And what would be more important than the king of Yllis having married a tadpole? But you're just not allowed to do that because the game didn't think of it, I guess. And something else that I've noticed, which is only a thing that I can notice having played more games since the last time I played Fire Emblem Awakening, is that for a console game, Fire Emblem Awakening has like the most robust sound settings I've ever had in a console game. Because most console games will be like, hey, here's your sound settings, are you wearing headphones? And that'll be like the only one. I think Metal Gear Solid 5 on console, their sound settings are really just that. I know it's just one thing, it might not be that specifically, but it's like a sound setting submenu, and then it's one setting. So that's a bit of a misnomer. But Awakening comes with as many sound settings as you'll typically find on any PC game, which is astounding to me, and would be really useful if I was playing this on a capture card, where I could actually get the audio for you guys to listen to, but it's just gonna be music, because the way I have to record my 3DS's audio is I have to stream it remote or wirelessly using a bunch of homebrew stuff, because I don't have a capture card yet. I'll probably have one day, but not right now, so here we are. And then one last thing that I want to praise before I get into the things that I've noticed that I don't like as much on my new playthrough is that this time I'm playing on hard, because all of my previous playthroughs of Fire Emblem Awakening have either been on normal or on Lunatic, and Lunatic are all the ones that I didn't finish, because Lunatic is exactly as hard as it sounds, so there's really no surprise there. The thing that's really surprising to me is why I even went to Lunatic so many times in the first place, because I don't know why I just skipped over hard. Like, yeah, Fire Emblem Awakening is not a very hard game on normal, but I was never like having such an easy time with it that I was like, I'm just gonna skip hard and go straight to Lunatic, because I didn't even really know how to play Fire Emblem Awakening, efficiently at least, until the last time I played it. So I don't really understand why I tried to do Lunatic so early, but whatever the case may be, I'm doing it on hard now, and hard it's hard, and I like it that way, because I like strategy games, but more often than not, what ends up happening is that you'll reach a sort of exponential growth where the game cannot outpace how good you are at it. This happens with XCOM every single time I've ever played it, where at the very beginning the game's pretty hard, and then in the middle it'll be like a perfect balance of difficulty, but then by the time you reach the end game, you're so either good at everything or your units are so good at everything that you'll never actually struggle with anything, and the game becomes a little bit more boring because of that. And Fire Emblem Awakening on Hard, so far, has been consistently difficult. If anything, it's only gotten more difficult as the maps have gone on, which is when I'll get into my problems, but for now, I do like it on hard difficulty, and it's probably going to be how I play the game for the rest of all time, I guess. But to get into the negatives, it has to do with that difficulty spike that I mentioned earlier, because right before I started recording this, I only just passed Chapter 11, which is the Gangrel map, where he's just spam fucking units at you the entire game, and it took me way too many tries to do it, because at first I tried to go over to the forts on the left, and then just camp on those, because obviously forts give you defense buffs and all that, and it would stop more enemies from spawning, but there were so many enemies spawning throughout the map the entire time, that eventually it just wore down my units at the front, who were my strongest, by the way, because it was Robin and Crom, and even if it wasn't them getting killed, it was whoever was supporting them getting killed, like Kellum, or Long Q, or any of the healers that I had in the forts that I was hoping and praying did not low roll and actually got to dodge, but it didn't happen frequently enough to be a really consistent strategy. And then even among that, whenever I would make progress and I would go, oh, okay, so this is what I did wrong. I had Kellum too far up and he got killed by a magic user. I had this person too far up and they got killed by the hero that fucking spawns. Whenever I would realize, oh, okay, this is what I did wrong here, it would still not really work out, because when I did something right the next time, a different thing would just fuck me up. And so there was no correct answer to whatever I was doing, except for sometimes when it was just get lucky and hope long Q crits, or that this person dodges, and whatever else might happen. And so I eventually just gave up on the forts, and what I tried to do then was stick to the forests. And that worked better the very first time I tried it, because everyone was just dodging the entire time and no one ever died, so they were allowed to just pick off all the people who were coming for them. But then someone died and I restarted and I was like, okay, I'll just try the forest again. But I must have just gotten really lucky that first time, because the second time there was always someone who died, because even with everyone paired up and everyone in the forest, it's still just me betting on dice rolls, and sometimes the dice rolls just aren't going to work out for you, and sometimes people would die, and so the forests weren't working either, at least not consistently. And so what I eventually settled on was a combination of the two strategies, where I would send over some decently strength people to the left to defend the forts, that no enemies would spawn there, and hopefully using the forts they'd be able to not completely eat shit, and then I'd have my strongest units, that being Crom and Robin, with a few people hanging back just in case, into the forest, to hopefully go so deep into enemy territory that they would eventually make it to a fort to stop enemy spawns, as well as being able to use the forts to take on any enemies that would hopefully not aggro anyone in the back. And eventually, that's the strategy that ended up working, but I'm not happy about it, because while there is an element to enjoy about having to come up with that specific strategy that allowed me to win the map, the only reason I even had to come up with that strategy in the first place was because the map is kind of poorly designed. Even minus the aspect of the game where there's levels and stuff, because I've come to accept that an aspect of tactics games is that if I'm going to enjoy them, I just have to get over the RPG bullshit, which is also how I treat RPGs, with RPG bullshit in them. But it still doesn't make me happy having to know that part of the only reason that this map is so fucking hard is because there's a huge difficulty spike in the level of enemies that we're fighting, and so any characters that aren't adequately leveled, which is going to be some of them, since if you spread out your EXP, which you should do in any game with a party in it, if you want to be able to use all the characters, you're just gonna be left behind by anyone who isn't the strongest characters. But even disregarding the high level of enemies, it was also just a problem of there are too many fucking enemies. The consistent way I would always have people die is that there were simply too many units to cover all of my bases, and so they would just get worn down by 5 different people doing 10 damage. And since the only units that I had that were strong enough to deal with a different enemy in one interaction were Varian if he was dealing with a flyer, Long Q if he got a crit, and then Robin and Crom, for the most part, we would not be able to get rid of enemies faster than they were coming. And my least favorite shit in strategy games is when they just make it a war of attrition with enemies that do not care about their own lives. Because XCOM also has a problem with this, where they might just throw a shit ton of strong enemies at you, or even just kind of weak enemies, but the risk of you losing your units is way higher than the risk of them losing their units, so they can do things like self-destruct or just walk out into point-blank range that they can flank you, and then not really give a shit because they have 9 really strong units and you have 6 if you're lucky, and deep into the game. And I can't even make it easier on myself by getting more levels for the characters that were weaker, because there's really no way to grind in Fire Emblem Awakening, because if you want to fight random enemies, you have to wait a real life time for them to spawn on the map. If you want to spawn enemies yourself, you have to have like 5,000 gold, which is not something you're going to have because you only get 2,000 per map if you're lucky. And while the DLC maps exist for you to be able to grind levels on, I feel like that's kind of cheating because the game wasn't made with DLC in mind. So is it really a real way to play the game if I go on hard and then I grind out levels in maps that, again, were not a part of the game originally? Which is how I'll leave it for now, but I will be coming back to this later because that's kind of what our weekly topic is about. But for now, I want to move on to the other RNG thing that I've been playing this week that I'm not a huge fan of, which is the Pokemon Trading Card mobile game. Which I feel isn't really a surprise, because I feel like I've mentioned before that I don't like deck builders, and then this is a deck builder where the cards you get are also random, because it's like trading cards, guys. You remember going into stores to buy trading cards, and sometimes you just get a bunch of bullshit? Don't you love that part of trading cards? I mean, I say that sarcastically, but unironically, people do love that part of trading cards, and I have no idea why. But then, on top of normal trading card bullshit, there's also the fact that it's a mobile game, and it very much feels like a mobile game, and it's funny that I can even say that because I haven't really played a mobile game in probably over a year at this point, because for the most part, I'm in places where I can play real video games, and when I'm out and about, I don't want to play a video game. I'll just like put a YouTube video on and put my phone in my pocket. So the last time I played a mobile game was probably when I played Colossatron on my phone, and even then, that wasn't really a mobile game because I had to download an APK for it because it wasn't on the App Store anymore, which they put it back up now. I have no idea why it was down in the first place, but I just felt like playing Colossatron because it was a part of my childhood. If I were to try and think even further back to like the last time I played a real mobile game, I wouldn't even be able to tell you. But despite all this, playing the Pokemon trading card game was laughably obvious when I started playing it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a mobile game thing, because mobile games aren't real video games, and I respect you less if you play them. Which is a bit of hyperbole. The part about respecting people, not the part about mobile games being real video games, because I do wholeheartedly believe that. I think that mobile games are just not real games, because they're not designed like real games. They're designed like time wasters. But to get back to Pokemon, it's fine. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't like deck builders, but I think that Pokemon is a fine deck builder for 2 reasons. For one, the deck is way smaller than I feel other deck builders have been, because I've only played Hearthstone and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, whichever one's the free one on PC, and between those, decks would be like way bigger than I believe they were in Pokemon, and so if I didn't get the card that I wanted, it was like, alright, well, shit out of luck, I guess. But in Pokemon, I'll have like 6 or so item cards, and so you only have like 14 Pokemon, and most of those will be Pokemon that you evolve, so you don't have to worry about decks being filled with shit that you don't want at the current moment. It'll still happen, because it's a deck builder game, and that's just how these things are, but that's the part that I don't like. The part of actually building the deck, I don't mind that much, at least compared to other games. It still has nothing on Shovel Knight King of Cards, which is the only deck builder that I think is good and that I've liked, but Pokemon's done a fine job of holding my attention. Really, the only thing I even feel the need to point out about this game is that I feel like fire types suck, which I don't have like that many of them, so I guess I can't really speak on them, but I have like Flareon, Ninetales, Charizard, all that stuff, and it seems like a really common thing with fire types is that they have to discard energy for other moves, and that's just like consistently awful to play with. It's just not fun. If you ever get Charmander as your base Pokemon that you just have to use at the beginning of a match, you might as well just quit then, because you're not going to be able to do anything. But for a game that I actually like, Kingdom Hearts 2, which is another game that I wasn't supposed to really be playing all that much, but I got more into it than I was supposed to. But unlike Fire Emblem Awakening, I was always supposed to come back to Kingdom Hearts 2 at some point to get 100%. It just ended up happening sooner than I thought it would. And I honestly don't have much to say, because I've beaten the game already. It's mostly just me going for 100%, which is a bunch of stupid bullshit at this point. And most of it's just shit that I don't even feel the need to talk about, like the Mushroom 13. Well, the Mushroom 13 that I've done. I know that they get a little bit more annoying later on. But the absent silhouettes are, you know, they're fun, but they weren't, like, particularly interesting. Except for Marluxia, but even then he wasn't, like, the hardest thing in the world. It'll be more something to talk about when I do the data version of him. And then, like, grinding dry forms, which, again, is not much to talk about because it's just grinding. And I guess there's also Sephiroth, but that's not really a big thing either because I did that on stream in base Kingdom Hearts 2, which, if anything, it's easier in Final Mix. Not for any reason that I made use of, because the reason Sephiroth is easier in Final Mix is because of Limit Form, but I didn't use limit form, so it's about the same. I also want to argue that dodge roll, just even having the ability on Sora, made Sephiroth easier, which I would disagree about, because dodge roll does not work the same way it does in Kingdom Hearts 3, where you can dodge and instantly block. So for the most part, I would dodge something, then get hit by something immediately after. God forbid he ever used that Fire Pillar move, where dodge roll would just not take you far enough to get out of it, so I would have to use the Wisdom dodge. But to make a long story short, most of what I did was interesting enough to talk about this week, except for the one thing that I didn't record, because I didn't think it was going to be interesting, but it ended up being interesting after I already finished it, which was the Cavern of Remembrance, specifically the White Room, because most of the Cavern of Remembrance is just like some pretty tough enemies, and then like movement challenges, though calling them challenges might be stretching it a bit. But then you get to the last room, which is a white room where it's just a bunch of battle arenas, and initially, it's pretty fine, you know? You fight a couple of tough enemies, and it's like, yeah, whatever. And then you go to the second segment of the room, and you fight some more tough enemies, and it's a little bit longer. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But then you get to the third room, and not only are there like 3 times as many enemies, they are also the strongest versions of these enemies, and they're some of the most annoying enemies, like the Berserkers or the Dancers, and it was murder on my thumbs, because, for one, I had to hammer the attack button the entire time. I could not let up for even a single second. And then, on top of that, not only did I have to hammer the attack button, I also had to be on top of my menu the entire time, because I was in and out of dry forms like a madman. Because something that I'm glad I figured out on my last playthrough of Kingdom Hearts 2 is that going to a dry form restores all your magic and health, which is not something I knew originally about the game, and I'm glad that I knew it this time, because it was the only thing that got me through that goddamn room, because I was in and out of Valor form, Wisdom form. I think the only one that I didn't use was Master form, because between the two, if I wanted to take an extra bar to be able to use a limit form, I would just go into Final. But every single form had their use, because every single form had something to do. I would go into Valor to be able to get automatic parries against, like, the mages, I think they're called. Whichever guys are the ones who spawn the red blocks that attack while you're attacking them. But yeah, automatic parries against them. I would use Wisdom against the Dancers, so that they don't hit me with that stupid-ass grab move that does half your health. Limit form to make use of the invincibility you get during the limit abilities, and also just for good AoE damage. Or just if I needed to be able to enter a form to be able to heal when both my teammates were dead. And then Final Form, because it's Final Form. But despite how hard that room was, it was probably the most engaged I've ever been with Kingdom Hearts 2. Which isn't, like, to disparage the game, I do like it for the most part. It's just that, even on critical, the game asks you to pay attention, but it doesn't really ask for much beyond that. Like, it asks you to be able to pay attention to the game insofar as you keep yourself alive, but it doesn't really ask you to really make use of all the mechanics, and really just know how the game works to be able to get through whatever you need to get through, which, to be fair, would be kind of annoying for, like, normal random enemy encounters, but the point still stands that this is more than what the game's ever asked you for before, and it's all the better for it. I think I even used a limit in that room. Yeah, because I used Donald's Duck Flare for the first time ever in that room, because, again, I love Kingdom Hearts 2, but limits and summons are things I never use, because they're kind of awful. Well, okay, not awful, but they're just outclassed by every other option you have. Why would I ever use Chicken Little when I can just go into a dry form and then use Magnet? Why would I ever use Stitch when being an MP charge is like half the game? I don't even know what Genie and Peter Pan do. And then limits are cool, but they aren't really useful, because if I wanted to use all my MP on something, I would use it on a heal. That's like the whole point of Cure. But there are situations in that white room where I needed enemies to be preoccupied, and I didn't necessarily need the heal. So having Donald be able to use Duck Flare was insanely useful. And like I said, that room got me to use every single mechanic and really engage with the game. Except for summons. I still didn't use summons in that room, because, like I said, it would just been more useful to use dry forms. But still, it got me to engage with almost every mechanic, and that's good enough for me. An A- is still certainly a passing grade. And I am really mad that I didn't record it, because I think it would be some really interesting footage to watch, but it didn't happen, and I guess this has just taught me a lesson about recording everything that I play, even if I don't think it's going to be interesting, just in case, right? Which sort of brings me to Yakuza 6, because I've played every Yakuza game so far, mostly on my Steam Deck. I played a little bit of 3 and 4 on my PC, but for the most part I played Yakuza while at work, so what I would do is I would just play it on my Steam Deck, and then I would record clips on, like, the Decky Recorder, which is a plugin, but not for, like, this, because I wasn't doing the Backlog Bunker yet, just for, you know, keeping the clips around. But that's not really something I can do this time around, because I don't want to throw, like, fucking 580p footage up on screen when I'm talking about these games. So, preferably, whenever I get footage, I like to do it on PC, which means that I end up not playing things at work, because if I play it on my Steam Deck, that's footage I'm just not going to have for the Backlog Bunker, or at least footage I'm not going to want to use. And so, what ends up happening is that I'd save Yakuza 6 for playing it on PC, which was already a thing that was taking too long, because I didn't feel like watching Yakuza 5 cutscenes, because that game is way too long and way too boring. But when I eventually got to Yakuza 6, I was playing it on PC, and I realized that, like many other Yakuza games, it is a lot of cutscenes, a lot of long cutscenes too, and I figured this would probably make for some pretty bad footage, but I guess we're just gonna have to live with it for now. Because it's not like I even have much to say about Yakuza 6 anyway. It's in the Dragon Engine, which is the only time I've liked Yakuza combat, but it still has the problems of Yakuza combat, which is enemies blocking too much, or attacks coming out too slowly, and then there's weird things like the camera controlling the fucking horse, because there's no camera sensitivity options, which is bizarre for a PC game, but the camera is extremely sensitive, and so even moving it a little bit will like completely 180, which is not something you ever need in Yakuza games. I don't know why they made it so sensitive, but it's just not great feeling so far. From what I remember, Kiwami 2 felt better, but I'm not sure if that's my memory failing me, or if that's just because Kiwami 2 came out after Yakuza 6, so they had more time to refine the Dragon Engine combat. Whatever it may be. The point still stands, I like playing the Dragon Engine Yakuza games way more than I do the non-Dragon Engine Yakuza games, so I'm not going to have as bad a time with Yakuza 6 as I did the previous games. And, on top of that, Yakuza 6 isn't nearly as long as those fucking games, so I won't be on it for very long, and I'll be on to Yakuza 7, which is the whole reason I even started the Yakuza series, because I was interested in 7, but I was like, oh yeah, this is like a game with like a story, I should probably get into the rest of them, and man, I didn't think it was going to be this bad. But I'm almost there, and I'm almost free. Just this last game, and then I'm finally onto the RPGs, unless I decide to play Gaiden, which I probably won't, but never say never. But speaking of RPGs, really quick I wanted to mention that I demoed my game for the masses this week, and something that I learned, which was not something that I think would be particularly useful in terms of like actual game feedback, but something that I've learned is that the vast majority of people do not know what an RPG is, nor have they ever seen or played one, or even heard of one. Because I'll try to explain to them, it's like, oh yeah, it's like a turn-based, and they'll be like, what does that mean? And I'll be like, oh yeah, you pick your moves, and they're like, why can't I move? And I'm like, oh yeah, there's like the enemies over there, and they're like, why can't I move to the enemies? Or they'll choose the move, and they'll be like, why hasn't he attacked yet? And it's like, you have to choose which enemy you want to target. Or they'll do that shit, and they'll keep pressing the button, like, no, you already chose what you want to do, just let the attack play out, that's how it works. And I realized that it's like impossible to describe what an RPG is to someone who's never played one before, or who has rarely played video games at all. So of the people who had demoed my game, there were those who had played RPGs before and they were fine with it, and then there were those who are like I've described, who have never even heard of one before. And then of those people, the closest that they had ever gotten to knowing it of an RPG was Pokemon. And so, while it's something that I'm always keenly aware of, given how much of the internet that I use, it's just a good reminder that the general masses are not even kind of the same as the people who I regularly talk to, or even engage with, because the people who know anything about video games are the vast minority. The vast majority are the people who buy fucking Madden every year, and have only ever played Madden, and have never even heard of a Final Fantasy. What the fuck even is that? Pokemon, that's for babies. Well, it is, but it's not just for babies. And then as for the last thing I want to talk about this week is I played Marvel Rivals, which was, at this point I'm recording this, last night, because I record these on Friday, and Marvel Rivals came out yesterday. And I spent a long time last night playing it, and from what I can even say about the game right now, I like it, but I'm not sure it really goes beyond that, because I know that praising Overwatch 2 is to blaspheme, but there are things I like about Overwatch 2, and by things I mean two things, and by two things I mean one thing that I actually like about the game, and then one thing that I only like because it's not in Marvel Rivals. And those things are Orisa and Roll Q. To get to the first one, the less controversial one, I love Orisa in Overwatch 2, specifically in Overwatch 2, because in Overwatch 1 she was lame and boring and stupid, but in Overwatch 2, they made her way, way, way more fun. And despite the fact that I don't like hero shooters, I have considered getting back on Overwatch 2 multiple times just to play Orisa, because I think she is that fun of a character to play. And I never have to face any competition when I'm playing her, because no one likes playing tanks, which brings you to the second thing, which is Roll Q. And I know people don't like Roll Q, but I actually don't really know why. I've probably been told at some point, but I just forgot. But whatever the reason is, I probably disagree with it, because I like Roll Q, at least in how it works relative to Marvel Rivals, because I understand now that Roll Q is a bit of a necessary evil, because if you don't do Roll Q, then you'll have people choosing attackers for like 90% of the game, and then you'll have a team of like 4 attackers, 1 tank and 1 healer, and at least in Marvel Rivals' case, 1 healer is not going to be able to heal the entire team. In Overwatch it's a little bit different, because in Overwatch 2 there's only 1 tank now, and tanks are given a lot of self-healing, or just abilities to keep themselves alive for longer, and so it doesn't really matter as much there. But in Marvel Rivals, tanks do come a little bit of self-healing, but I still just don't like playing any of them, and so tanks end up being a barren wasteland, and then healers are okay, but like I said, they're all kind of weak, and so one healer is not going to be able to carry an entire team. You need to have two of them to be able to make use of both of their healing abilities. And so when you end up with games where everyone wants to play duelist and no one wants to play healer and no one wants to play tank, you end up with games where you just have to lose because no one wants to play any of the classes that statistically just aren't very fun to play. Which isn't helped by the fact that the tank and healer classes also just have way less characters than the duelists. Like, I'm pretty sure that even if you combine the tank and healer classes, you still wouldn't have as many characters as there are in the duelist class. And so I've come to understand that role queue is just a necessary evil, because otherwise you're not going to get pit with people who want to play healer. Of which I think there will be very few when it comes to Marvel Rivals, because I don't have fantastic aim, but I am able to visually focus on whatever I'm looking at. I'm just not going to be able to hit it most of the time. But even being able to keep track of who I even need to heal in Marvel Rivals has been an uphill battle, to say the least. Because everyone has such crazy movement abilities and is all over the goddamn place. God forbid ever trying to heal Spider-Man or Venom. Just give up. But everyone's moving all around the place so frantically that it does genuinely get hard to keep track of who you need to heal and when you need to heal and where they even are in relation to you. Because, like in many hero shooters, people aren't very good at understanding when they need to stick with their team, or where in their team they need to be standing to be able to make good use of their abilities. Like, hey, if you're a tank, then stay in the front. If you're damage, stay behind the tanks, or stay in front of the healers. If you keep getting behind the healers, then I'm not going to be able to heal you, because I have to keep chasing after you to get heals while I'm getting shot in the back. Which I guess is just why I don't like hero shooters, because you're so dependent on your team to make the right decisions that if they're not making the right decisions, even if you're playing the fun part of the game, you might just not be. So in terms of how the game will look for the future, I can't really say, because like I said, I'm not like a hero shooter expert, but I do want to see changes to things like how many healers there are, like how many there are in both the healer and tank classes, and then major buffs across the entire healer class to either make them heal way faster or have way more self-healing, because even among the times where I was able to heal my team, if there wasn't another healer, which again, there usually wasn't because there were 4 people going duelist and then 1 tank, then me as the healer would not be getting healed very often, if ever, because not all healers come with self-healing abilities. And then I think the third-person view is a little bit annoying, because it very often either gets caught in front of geometry or gets caught in front of other heroes, because I think one of the most distinct times it happened to me was when I was playing a game and I think a magic used her portal to spawn right on top of me, and the entire span of the portal covered my entire screen for like half a second, which granted isn't really that bad, but it's half a second too long in the game where there are many firefights where you need to be shooting at people, so it's not something I'm a fan of. But to get into the positives, there are characters that I like, which the reason I brought up Orisa earlier is because part of what I think is a little bit worrying about Marvel Rivals is that there isn't a character that I'm in love with quite yet. And I did go through every single one of them in training mode, so this isn't a case of like I just haven't found them yet. No, just of the characters that exist, none of them are ones I'm in love with. There are ones I like a lot, but not any that I'm in love with. Firstly, there's the Punisher, who I like because he's pretty simple and because he's kind of like Bastion, who is the other character that I like a lot from Overwatch. Not as much as Orisa post Overwatch 2 changes, but still, I like Bastion a lot. He is my other character that I play frequently in Overwatch 2. Then Loki, who I find extremely interesting, but also very hard to play, so I'm probably not going to end up playing him very often unless there's another healer in the game, and we need someone else to be healing. But I find his kit like fascinating to try and play with. And so if I end up getting better at it, it might become a character that I just love playing, but for now, he's just a character that I'm very interested in, that I want to see more of. Squirrel Girl is on the list because I think she's really good, or at least her main fire is pretty good, but in terms of actually wanting to play her, it's a little bit because to like a character in a hero shooter, at least to me, it comes down to is their main fire fun to use, and are their abilities fun to use? And Squirrel Girl is a case of her main fire is fun to use, but her abilities are not, so she's on the list if I wanted to like explore more of her, but for now it's really just she's there. Then Iron Fist, who's the only melee character that I like in the game, because he very much has the potential to do a lot of damage if he gets in close and just is allowed to pop off, which ties back to something I mentioned on the Marvel Midnight Suns episode of this whole series, which is I like characters with go modes, and Iron Fist very much has a go mode where if he's allowed to pop off, he can just wipe through an entire team, and that's not even if he has an ultimate. If he has an ultimate, then it's over. But even beyond that, he just has a go mode that I like. And then to the two characters I like playing the most, they are Star-Lord and Iron Man. Iron Man is unsurprising because, I mean, come on. Call it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I don't think I've ever played a Marvel game where I don't like playing as Iron Man, so that's just going to be the way it is. I like his main fire and his secondary fire, and then his abilities are just, hey, make the main and secondary fire even better. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of is flying, because this applies to all the characters in Marvel Rivals, to be honest, but I don't like the flying controls a whole lot, because to descend, you either need to use control, which is really slow, or you need to aim up and then move backwards, which is not going to work, because you can't be aiming up in a game where you're shooting people. But Iron Man does better just shooting pot shots in the air anyway, so I have no complaints, at least not really. And then Star-Lord, who's kind of like Tracer, in that his main guns are low ammo, high fire rate, and hit scan. And then Star-Lord himself is a quick little bastard who just keeps moving all around the goddamn place. And I just like being able to shoot, dodge, and then do that consistently, because I like movement in my shooters. That's why I like Titanfall 2 a lot. And since he's such a simple character, it does just allow me to consistently do the parts of his character that I like playing as, which is the dodging and the shooting, and not have to worry about much else. And it does help that his voice lines are really good, because Star-Lord is a lame bastard, and he's fantastic for it. He's got voice clips where he unironically calls people losers, he's got clips where he's simping over Hela because she's a dom mom, I guess. And I choose to believe in my headcanon that this Star-Lord is a Persona fan, because when he does his ultimate, I have no idea what he says, but it sounds like he says Hecaton Jerry's, which is a pretty good Persona in the Persona games, so I just assume that that's his favorite Persona ever, and he just says that when he uses his ultimate, for no reason, other than that's what it sounds like. And despite all this praise on him heaping on Star-Lord, like I said, he's just not, none of them are Orisas. I like Star-Lord a lot, but he's not a character I'm in love with. He is not a character that I will throw on Marvel Rivals just to play. So like I said, I'm hopeful for the game, because I want it to be a game that I like playing, but if it's not the end of the world, because like I said, I'm not a huge fan of hero shooters anyway, so it's not a huge loss, it's just kinda saddening. Which means that we can finally get to the topic for the week, which is about exploits in games, and specifically which exploits are even exploits, and which are just like a part of the game. Essentially, what's a bug and what's a feature. Because initially, when I thought of this topic, it was mostly just about Sparking Zero, because if you're not aware, recently a Sparking Zero player got banned from a tournament because he was using some strategy that was like seen as cheesy or whatever, where I think he just picked a really good character and then ran away the whole match, which is annoying and stupid, yes. However, if it's in the game, why isn't it allowed? Like, to take Smash Bros, for example, you're allowed to sort of stall in Smash Bros, as long as the stalling isn't unstoppable. Like, you can't do Meta Knight's Infinite Dimensional Cape in Brawl, because there's no way to stop that. He's just invincible for the entire game. But there's no like, ban against Sonic running away in Smash Ultimate, because that's just what he's supposed to do. That's his game plan. And if you can't catch him, that's your fault. And so, when I look at Sparking Zero, and I see someone getting banned for that, I wonder, did he get banned because the strategy was, like, actually unbeatable? Or is it just because it's hard? Because if the answer is just because it's hard, then he shouldn't be banned for that. That's not really an exploit, that's just how the character works. The Brawl Meta Knight thing is an exploit. That's not supposed to happen. But it is a accidental feature of the game. But in Sparking Zero, I assume characters are meant to be faster than some other characters, or however it works. I have not seen most Sparking Zero footage because I'm not interested in 3D anime fighters, but the way I assume it works is you can catch them if you try, it's just hard to actually catch them, much like chasing after a Sonic in a Smash Bros. And like I said, I haven't seen the actual like footage of this Sparking Zero gameplay that is actually going on, and so if it actually is some exploit, then, like I said, it's fair. But it brings up the question of when does a feature become an exploit? Because, to stick to Smash Bros, let's take Steve for example. A lot of Steve tech that people are finding is getting closer and closer to bug territory that I would call an exploit that might be worthy of a ban. Because there is things like the launch canceling, which at this point I don't remember how it works. I've not been into Smash Bros for a while now, but it was something where it's like Steve could just cancel out getting launched by placing a block in a specific situation. And while yes, it is a niche situation, it is a situation where he can just stop himself from getting killed, and I think that's not really fair. But is that an exploit that's like too far out of the game's scope, or is that just a way the game works? Because another way the game works is DI, which you wouldn't call DI an exploit. That's just a part of the game, and DI manipulation to like get out of multi-hits or whatever is more just a part of the game. And so when you get to a character like Steve, who's supposed to be fucky and weird, when do you know what's an exploit and what's just a funky part of Steve's physics? Because again, to stick to Smash Bros, a lot of the things people love in Melee are exploits. They are things that were not intended to be in the game. It is only by virtue of Melee being a broken, unfinished, buggy mess that was made in 2 years that a lot of the things people love about the game even exist. And so when we look back at Sparking Zero to actually pull the circle back around, then what's the difference between the two? And I think it really comes down to, well, people think that the melee exploits are fun, the Sparking Zero exploits aren't. If anything, that's explicitly what the Sparking Zero exploits aren't. The reason that the person was banned is because it's not fun. It's not fun to watch, it's not fun to play. Which is incredibly understandable when you explain it that way, because, yeah, if it's not fun, then, yeah, fuck it, get it out of here. But that starts to provide a very, very fine line where you start to think about, well, what is fun? Because in this Sparking Zero situation, yeah, it might not be fun for either party to just run away the entire game, or to just be flying the entire game, but could the same argument not somewhat be applied to Sonic and Smash Bros? It's not fun to have to chase Sonic down, and while the Sonic player might find it fun to be chased the entire game, why does it not apply to Sparking Zero? Maybe I do like running away the entire game, just as Sonic's like doing the same thing. And so when you start talking about, well, okay, this is banned because it wasn't fun, you start to get into really subjective questions, like, well, what if people find it fun? What are you supposed to do then? Is it majority? If the majority of people find it fun, then is it okay? Because even if it would never happen, that means you have to accept the reality that if the majority of people decide that Meta Knight Dimensional Cape is fun, then you're just gonna have to live with a Meta Knight Dimensional Cape meta. And so trying to use fun as an objective metric is always going to be pretty fucked up. And, now granted, tournament rules are always going to be subjective because they're made up by people who will decide whether or not they want to see things in a game in a certain capacity. But subjective to the point where all it takes is one person going, yeah, but I like it though, to call into question your entire reasoning is a metric that I don't think should be used. And so if you're going to be, like I said, it's already subjective, but you shouldn't try to make it even more subjective by introducing things like, well, do people find it fun? Because that's a whole different conversation. But then you even get into things like single-player games. Are the DLC maps in Fire Emblem Awakening an exploit? Because I brought it up earlier to bring it back now, where I feel like they're cheating, because, like I said, they're not an intended part of the game. When the game first came out, you could play it on hard, and the DLC maps weren't a thing. So you're not supposed to be able to just grind forever. But at the same time, it is a game dictated by levels, because, you know, it's a tactical RPG, and it's not like you're not supposed to be able to grind at all, because enemies do still spawn in the overworld, you just have to wait real-life time for it. And so if you do DLC maps, aren't you just cutting out the middleman, that being time? Which is why I've ultimately come to the conclusion that I'm going to be using the DLC maps to get my levels up, because, like I said, you can just do that, I just have to wait real-life time for it, and waiting real-life time is not good game design. I've brought it up for other games, and I will continue to bring it up for future games, because it will always be a problem. I'm looking at you, the world ends with you. But this is genuinely a question that expands to a lot of other video games, and it's probably something that I'll keep in my back pocket for another episode, because I might want to talk about this again when I play more games, when we get to more of, well, what is an exploit? It'll probably come up with more fighting games, it'll probably come up with more single-player games, so, like I said, I'll probably end up coming back to this topic, but for now, I do just want you to think about that, because, yeah, what does count as an exploit? Does it have to be a bug specifically? Is it just something that's a poorly designed part of the game that they didn't think about? What is it that defines this line between a feature and a bug? Is it a gray area? How big is the gray area? What's in that gray area? Things like that. But for now, I bid you get out of here. Leave.